Sir, on behalf of the uh, University College of Law, Usmania University, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Professor Dr. Pratap Reddy Garu to the participants. Professor Y. Pratap Reddy sir received his BSc, BL and MA degrees from Sri Venkateswara University and LLM and PhD degrees from Usmania University. Obtained LLM degree with specialization in jurisprudence. Sir did his PhD on the topic of public interest litigation in India. Sir is recipient of 2 gold medals for standing first in LLM and started teaching career in 1985 and is still continuing as a law teacher. Earlier, Sir served as a law teacher at Sir C. R. Reddy Law College, Eluru, Andhra Pradesh, Sultan Ulum Law College, Hyderabad, and both Postgraduate College of Law and University College of Law, Usmania University, Hyderabad. Sir has interest in teaching jurisprudence, interpretation of statutes, administrative law, and law of evidence. Sir has held the positions of Chairperson Board of Studies in Law and Head Department of Law in Usmania University. Professor Pratap Reddy sir has published 20 research papers in law journals and attended a number of national and international seminars. Sir has delivered guest lectures at various institutions, including AP Judicial Academy, Murray Chennareddy Human Resources Development, AP Excise Academy, AP Police Academy, Damodaram Sanjeevaya National Law University, Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, Andhra University, Acharya Nagarjuna University, Sir Padmavati Mahila University, etc. Sir is also a recognized research supervisor in the Faculty of Law, Usmania University and ICFA University, guiding the research scholars. Sir has retired from the service of Usmania University in 2017 and is associated with ICFA University and presently working as Professor of Law at ICFA Law School, Hyderabad. Thank you, sir.
Respected law teachers, research scholars, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening to all of you. At the outset, I thank the organizers for this invitation to interact with the participants of this faculty development program. So this faculty development program is on the theme of effective teaching, learning, and research in law, the COVID-19 challenges. We are all the witnesses of the present day crisis and other developments. This COVID-19 pandemic has affected everyone in all walks of life. Nobody is an exception to it. Therefore, the contextualization of the topic has been the idea of the organizers. That is the reason why there is a reference to COVID-19 challenges. I started my career as a law teacher in the year 1985, and I taught law students both undergraduate program and the postgraduate program for 35 years. In these 35 years of my journey as a law teacher, I find any change or a remarkable change in the teaching style or teaching methods. There may be change in the content, not in methods and teaching methodology. However, now we are in the age of transformation The time requires a change in our approach in teaching law, any law subject for that matter. So with this observation of my experience, I proceed to discuss formally what I want to convey to the attendees of this program. The next slide, please. We all know, since we are in this system of imparting education, so there is a link between education and knowledge. We believe that knowledge is a source of, education is a source of knowledge. We gain knowledge, everyone for that matter, not only in legal education, education in general. We gain some knowledge through education. That is why the importance has been given to education for any development. These three expressions, teaching, learning, and research, they are the important components of education. Since we are engaged in this process of teaching, learning, and also research, a teacher must have some idea about theories of learning, methods of research, as well as techniques of teaching. It has been said that the original is in Sanskrit, therefore the meaning of it has been taken. 1/4 of knowledge gained from the teacher, 1/4 from own effort, that is self-reading, 1/4 from the peer group or the group discussions, and the remaining 1/4 from maturity, that is the passage of time. Everyone gains some knowledge by maturity, out of experience. By watching, one can gain some knowledge. From the group also, one can gain some knowledge, and 1/4 of knowledge by one's own effort, and only 1/4 from teacher. If it is true, if we accept this maxim, then the role of the teacher in imparting knowledge to student of any discipline is only 1/4. The remaining from other sources. As it is further emphasized, knowledge once acquired cannot be destroyed even by creature's creator. It is a permanent asset. There is no question of destroying it by anyone. So this one more comment from a sociologist. The great aim of education is not knowledge, but action. So it gives an impression that my aim of education is not only imparting knowledge, but something more. What is that? We will go little further. Next slide, please. Already, because I joined by 6:30, by that time the session was going on the new education policy of 2020. A learned speaker was, in fact, answering the questions from the participants. So to know something about new education policy is necessary to teacher. There has been debate and discussion nationwide on this new education policy in the past 2 years. Finally, it has been given a shape. Only to highlight a few points to remind all of you about the role of teachers, the changing role of teachers in view of this new education policy. This new education policy intends to bring a education from teaching model to learning model, from rigid curriculum to flexible curriculum, from knowledge imparting education to career-oriented education, from affiliation system to autonomy for institutions, and also from monodisciplinary to multidisciplinary approach. You might have gone through the major thrust of this new education policy. The emphasis is on the learning. Hitherto, we discussed teaching methods, how we teach, what to teach, how to teach. But hereafter, the focus is on the learning models. The rigid curriculum is watertight compartmentalization of disciplines or subjects. From this rigid curriculum to a movement towards flexible curriculum, giving a wide choice to the learners, the students, to choose their own subjects, not only from one discipline, from different disciplines. And there were questions also on this aspect, affiliation system and autonomy for institutions. In the years to come, if at all this new education policy is implemented in its letter and spirit, every institution imparting this higher education will become an autonomous institution, designing the curriculum and designing the methods of instruction, assessment, evaluation, everything, if at all affiliation system is given up. Finally, from knowledge imparting education to career-oriented education, employability, entrepreneurs, making them, as some of them may become entrepreneurs. Therefore, the focus is on their career. In addition to imparting knowledge. Knowledge is not an end. It is a means to an end. What is the end of this knowledge? The career development. So these are some of the objectives of this new education policy of 2020. I wish to remind all of you that teachers must also be prepared for this change. Then next slide, please. Coming to our aspect, legal education. There is a lot of literature, that is a rich literature on the legal education, various models, objectives, etc. A few points only explaining the law students and their expectations. In law courses, in legal education, students come with different backgrounds, constituting a heterogeneous group. We all know about the fact. Take any institution, students are coming from to this law program, coming with different backgrounds and socially different groups, people with different languages. More or less, this classroom becomes a heterogeneous group of students. As we know, in 3-year law program, any graduate with a first degree, maybe from medicine, engineering, arts, commerce, science, and some other discipline. Even in 5-year program also, they come with science background, commerce background, or social sciences background, like that. They come with a lot of hopes and expectations. These young minds are coming to that is institutions imparting legal education with a lot of hopes and expectations. Naturally, it is a challenging task for institutions imparting legal education to meet their demands or their requirements. The task before law teachers, especially who are engaged in imparting legal education, how to make them professionally competent and socially responsible citizens. How to make them to acquire analytical skills, abilities of critical thinking, and ethical values. So it is in this context, law teachers are under duty to fulfill their demands, and law teachers have no right to spoil their career. Their career their career is in the hands of law teachers. This is another important role to be played by law teachers in discharging their duties as part of the institution, any college, university, or the department. The next slide, please. This is all only introductory in nature. Before we take up the teaching and effective teaching, the status of legal education in India, if you have a look, there are very different types of institutions imparting legal education. We have national law schools. Almost in every state, there is a national law school or university at present. More than 20, I don't know the exact number. There are a good number of national law schools. To start with National Law School of India, University, Bangalore. So later on, in these 2 or 3 decades, somewhere in 1987, it was, I think, started. From 1987 to this day, nearly 30 years. In this 30 years journey, number of law schools established. State universities imparting this legal education either through departments or through separate colleges. Then there are private universities or deemed to be universities like that, imparting legal education. There are government-funded law colleges or government-aided law colleges or government-run law colleges in some states. And lastly, there are self-funding law colleges. There are many. Though I am not giving the statistics, this is the status of legal education in India. All these institutions are fully involved in imparting legal education, especially undergraduate program in law. Of course, all these bodies are under the regulatory regime of the Bar Council of India and also the University Grants Commission. Even if new education policy is fully implemented, the role of Bar Council of India is not taken away. It is always under the regulatory, regime of the BCI. The next one. It is in this background we have to discuss the teaching methods and the effective teaching techniques. The programs that are being offered in these institutions are professional programs, both 3-year law program and 5-year law program, Academic programs like BAL and BGL, Bachelor of General Laws, Bachelor of Academic Laws, they are not eligible. Those degrees are not recognized by the Bar Council of India, though they are not eligible to enroll as advocates, but they are the degrees awarded by the universities for academic purposes. As we discussed already, if imparting knowledge is the objective of education, therefore this legal knowledge is essential for everyone. Therefore, BAL degrees and BGL degrees are offered by some universities or institutions. Then the postgraduate program in law. When we discuss teaching, effective teaching methods, postgraduate program is also part of this, I think, the legal education. Though Bar Council of India has no control over the postgraduate program, but the postgraduate program is important to produce academic lawyers. So because they are the persons, these academic, that is LLM holders or ML degree holders, they are the persons who are shaping up the future lawyers. Therefore, focus must also be there on the curriculum of LLM course. Then the research program, such as PhD program or LLD program, offered by universities, both public and private. Then the continuing legal education, such as these programs, these faculty development program or special programs organized for continuing legal education programs organized for the practicing advocates or for judges. You know, even judges are also being trained, teachers are being trained, advocates are being trained. Generally, these training programs are arranged only for those who are already trained, not for the new recruitees. Don't think that FDP program is only for the new, I think, recruitees or new, that is the teachers who are coming without experience. Those who are already experienced, those who are already trained, it is a continuing legal education program, which is organized, which is, I think, organized by many institutions. So to maintain the standards of legal education, and one more point for this discussion before we proceed further, to maintain the standards of legal education and legal profession, the Bar Council of India abolished evening courses and also not recognized law degrees through distance education mode. Those who know the developments in the recent 2 decades introduced or changes introduced by the Bar Council of India in our course curriculum. So at one point of time, this LLB course, 3-year LLB course was offered in the evening law colleges, which was prohibited by the Bar Council of India later. It was totally abolished. Then the distance education program, that is law programs through distance education mode, not recognized by the Bar Council of India. Because the underlying object was to impart, to, that is to, I think, give this, education on the regular basis to make the law graduates as professionally competent, to prepare them for the practice. That is the reason why the Bar Council of India had taken several steps to make this course as the regular one. Why I am making a point of it? Now we are, in fact, as a matter of necessity or expediency, we are conducting the programs online. So can it be an effective substitute of the regular classwork? These are the questions which are, I think, to be addressed. In that context only, I mentioned this point, that at one point of time, the Bar Council of India abolished these part-time courses, that is evening courses, as well as not recognized the law degrees offered through distance education mode. Coming to the curriculum, so the curriculum is important in this program. So law has been compartmentalized for the purpose of teaching and learning. It has its impact in practice. It has its impact on practice also. Why this compartmentalization of subjects? Law is law, and subjects are now, if you take the present curriculum, there are more, I think roughly, there are, excluding electives, there are roughly 30 law subjects taught in the law school. Why this compartmentalization into personal law? I think what is that? Law of torts, criminal law, property law, environmental law, constitutional law, international law, like that. But the widely followed practice in our curriculum is compartmentalization of law subjects. Whether this compartmentalization is affecting the, I think, the learning, that is the learning process that we have to observe. In fact, a holistic approach is necessary. When law subjects are, I think, categorized or compartmentalized, there is no one universal method suitable to all subjects. There is no one universal method. Next slide, please. There is no one universal method suitable to teach all subjects. Probably in this, I have seen the program sheet of this program. So there were sessions on teaching of IPR, teaching of constitutional law, teaching of something like that, teaching of some other subjects. Because teaching of IPR may be different from the teaching of constitutional law or public law. Teaching of international law may be different from teaching of the property law. So therefore, this compartmentalization is followed in practice. Therefore, the single method is not suitable to teach all law subjects. Therefore, teaching methods are subject specific. Within the subject, topic specific. There cannot be one fixed, I think, method of teaching that is suitable to teach all law subjects. That is why the approach in teaching public law may be different from teaching private law. Similarly, teaching substantive law may be different from the teaching of procedural law. And further, teaching codified law is different from the teaching of uncodified law. Even today, uncodified law is a part of our curriculum. So when the teacher is teaching uncodified law, the methodology is different. The approach is different. The teaching codified law with the help of Baer Act section, the verbatim of the section, each and every word of the section can be, I think, explained and illustrated. The approach may be different. But if it is uncodified law, the source is totally a different one. Methodology should also be different in teaching of codified law and uncodified law. Broadly, law is divisible because this topic that has been assigned to me is effective teaching and what is that? Effective teaching and learning in law. In law means law in general. So that is the reason why I wish to discuss that law has been divided into different branches for the purpose of teaching as well as learning. So the civil branch of law is separated from criminal branch of law. Both the civil branch of law and criminal branch of law are separated from constitutional branch of law. That is how in practice also we have constitutional lawyers, lawyers on civil side and the lawyers on criminal side, because we are making them as such. However, a holistic approach is necessary in designing the curriculum. The next slide, please. Coming to my topic, the teaching, that is the topic of my assignment, teaching law in general of teaching law in general. Irrespective of this compartmentalization of law subjects, there are two courses that are relevant in teaching any law subject. Of course, those two courses are mentioned here only. What are those two subjects? If you examine in deep, if you go in depth, you can find the fact that the study of two subjects is indispensable in the curriculum, especially in the undergraduate law program. The study of these two subjects is indispensable. What are these two courses? To my mind, they are jurisprudence and interpretation of statutes. You all know these two subjects are compulsory subjects in the curriculum prescribed by the Bar Council and prescribed by almost all universities or institutions. In all common law countries, so jurisprudence is taught as a separate course. In India, so in the West also earlier, interpretation of statutes covered in the subject of jurisprudence. That is why even today, we can find a chapter on interpretation of statutes in a textbook of jurisprudence. Along with sources of law, such as customs, precedents, and legislation, this interpretation of enacted law or interpretation of statutory law is discussed in the subject of jurisprudence, wherein theories of interpretation, principles of interpretation, or the rules of interpretation, if any, are discussed in brief. There is a brief reference to this topic of interpretation of enacted law in the subject of jurisprudence. So thanks to the Bar Council of India and the initiation from the Bar Council of India. So that is roughly 1.5 decades back or 2 decades back, the Bar Council of India suggested interpretation of statutes as a separate course, and it has been made as a compulsory course in the curriculum. That is why today, at present, in almost all our system, in all our institutions, interpretation of statutes is also taught as a separate subject. Why I am attaching so much of importance to these two subjects? Why these two subjects are relevant in teaching any law subject? That we know, but we are methodically ignorant of what we know. We know the utility of the study of these two subjects. They are relevant in teaching any subject, any law subject. They are relevant, they are useful in understanding or comprehending any law course, either at undergraduate level or in the postgraduate program. It was in the recent past, I delivered a lecture only to this department of Osmania University on jurisprudential foundation of legal research, wherein I made an attempt to establish a link between the methods of jurisprudence and methods of legal research. So the jurisprudence is a subject dealing with law in general. The law in general. It is applicable to all kinds of law, be it national law or international law, or constitutional law or statutory law, either judge-made law or customary law. All these laws, their nature has been discussed in the subject of jurisprudence. It is a museum of theories expounded by the scholars over a period of 25 centuries. All these theories were arranged in this museum that is the subject of jurisprudence. Therefore, an exposure to jurisprudence, that is legal theory, and also an exposure to interpretation of statutes is necessary for any law teacher. Why? I can, if go on discussing, so there is no end for it. Let us forget about jurisprudence as a conventional subject. Take up the most, applied subject. If at all jurisprudence is a pure subject, theoretical subject. Coming to the interpretation of statutes, which is practically, I think, significant and relevant in every law, whether it is constitution or the Contract Act, or the Indian Penal Code, or some other legislation. We are not teaching all these enactments or legislations in the classroom. There are thousands of legislations enacted by enacted by Parliament and state legislatures in India. All these legislations are not taught in the classroom. What we have to teach the student, how to read those statutes, how to interpret them, that we have to teach, enabling them to read any statute or any enactment, because the legislative process is a continuing process. Laws are amended, repealed and reenacted. You know the technique adopted in recent times in India. Legislations were repealed and reenacted. It started with the Companies Act, then the Consumer Protection Act, even Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Act. Like these legislations were repealed and reenacted. So when a legislation is repealed and reenacted, every time we need not to tell the student this is the change that has been affected by this repeal and reenactment. We have to teach the students how to read the statute, how to interpret it. So that is why, whether it is interpretation of the Constitution, interpretation of penal statute, or interpretation of taxing statute, even interpretation of power conferring legislations, a teacher teaching administrative law has to, I think, explain the students about the interpretation of the power conferring statute. So how power conferring statutes can be interpreted. For that purpose also, for the purpose of interpretation also, statutes are classified into different categories that you may know, like constitutional statutes, penal statutes, taxing statutes, remedial statutes, protective legislations, welfare legislations. So this is how the legislations are classified into different categories, even for the purpose of interpretation. Therefore, an exposure to theories of interpretation and principles of interpretation necessary for any lawyer, to a law student, and also a law teacher. Therefore, an exposure to these two subjects, subject of jurisprudence and the subject of interpretation of statutes, an indispensable. It is necessary for the proper understanding of any law course, any law subject. That is why it has been stated here, law has always been taught with the help of theories, principles, their practices, and applications. The practice is always molded by the theory. Therefore, foundation is in theory. If any practice is built up or based upon, weak foundation, system cannot sustain. Therefore, those who are, those who are exposed to this legal theory or to the interpretation of statutes, they can better interpret, better, apply the law in their practice. Therefore, in the classroom setting also, we teach law subjects with the help of theories, principles, not only the rules. We are not only teaching the rules, we have to teach the theoretical foundation, we have to teach the principles that are applicable, and we have to make them to apply those theories and principles in their practice, in the application process. Law is not self-applier. Someone has to apply it, either in the capacity of a judge or in the capacity of an advocate, the application of law. So in the process of application, this theoretical knowledge is useful. So that is why, so an exposure to theories, principles necessary for the proper understanding of or for the proper application of the legal rules, even if we assume that law is a set of rules. Then it is in legal theory, there are different approaches, and it has been commented upon that. The knowledge of law is not the knowledge of a physical phenomenon. If one is good in law, that is sections, rules, and orders, it is not adequate enough. Mere knowledge of rules, mere knowledge of sections, mere reproduction of the verbatim of the statute is not adequate enough, because the knowledge of law is not the knowledge of a physical phenomenon, it is something more than that. Law is wider than legal rules and regulations. That is why the appeal here is to all teachers and law research scholars, think beyond the law. Think beyond the law. You cannot understand the law in isolation. You cannot insulate law from the other influences. You cannot become a good lawyer or a law teacher if you memorize only the rules, regulations, and orders, etc. You have to think beyond the law. So, think beyond the law is an appeal to every law teacher, so that the law teacher can discharge his duties in molding the law students professionally competent and socially responsible citizens with analytical skills, ability of critical evaluation, critical thinking, whatnot, everything. So then next slide, please. Coming to the legal methods, it is a subject of teaching in law program in some law schools. If you see the curriculum of national law schools, there is one paper on legal methods. There is a different paper in other law universities, either in the name of legal language like that. However, here there is some reference to legal methods. As I pointed out in the beginning, if you look at our curriculum of legal education, there is no drastic change in methods, but there is a change in content. At one point of time, there were only 18 law courses or law subjects in 3-year law program. 6 papers in each year. First year, 6 papers, second year, another set of 6 papers, and the final year, another set of 6 papers, including procedural laws, CPC, CRPC, and evidence. This was the content of the law program earlier in many institutions. So it was in the recent times, recent decades, the Bar Council of India expanded the scope of this curriculum, the syllabus of law program, by adding new courses. That is why at present, roughly, we have 30 courses in a 3-year law program. These 30 courses are taught along with other allied subjects in 5-year law program. That is what the curriculum today. There is a change in content. There is no drastic change in methods, excepting a few clinical courses that are included in the syllabus. We know in almost all law schools or universities, we have 4 clinical courses, earlier known as practical training courses. That is moot courts, internship, like that. Client, so internship, moot court, and court visits, simulation exercises, like that. there are 4 clinical courses in our curriculum at present. Therefore, the focus was on the content, not on the methods. That's why I told you, in these 35 years, what I taught in 1985, still I am using the same method of teaching in the classroom in 2020. Content may be slightly variant. There can be some additions. But the methodology and the method is remaining the same. That is why there is no focus on the method, teaching methods. The focus was on the content of the course. Even if you add some more courses, 50 to 60 courses in this 3-year or 5-year program, it may not, I think, result in the improvement in quality. No much improvement in the quality. So in order to provide quality legal education, there must be a focus on the method of teaching, the style of teaching. Therefore, there is a movement from, however, there was a movement from law-based legal education to fact-based legal education. What is this law-based legal education? That is teaching only law subjects without any reference to other social sciences and other allied subjects. Only to make or only to produce lawyers without any social content in the curriculum. Then the fact-based legal education introduced in this 5-year law program, study of law along with social sciences, some social science subjects like sociology, economics, and political science, including psychology, history, etc. So that is what fact-based legal education. This was a moment, undoubtedly. There was some change in the curriculum because there was a movement from law-based legal education to fact-based legal education. Even clinical courses or clinical legal education was also a part of this movement or this change. Now, there is a need for change in methods of teaching. Why? When there are changes in the styles of learning, there must be a corresponding change in the styles of teaching as well. How the styles of learning are, there are many studies on styles of learning. How the styles of learning are changing with the advancement of technology. When the styles of learning are changing, definitely there must be a corresponding change in the styles of teaching as well. That is noticed by every one of us. There is a comment that has been made long back by Justice Krishna Iyer in one of his writings. If our business methods are antiquated like our legal methods, ours would be a bankrupt country. When in the business, in the market, the methods are being changed, new techniques and strategies are being adopted in order to, I think, sustain in the competition. Similarly, there must be a change in our legal methods also. Even today, our legal methods are antiquated. Legal methods here mean methods employed by law teachers, methods employed by all others who are concerned with law, lawmakers, law appliers, legal practitioners. They are all, in wider sense, come under the expression lawyers. Therefore, this observation made. So this observation shows how antiquated our legal methods are. Next slide, please. Then there is enumeration of methods of law teaching. There are many studies on methods of law teaching. But in the internet, you can see the American literature on the topic of methods of law teaching. You know, the top law schools in the world are located in the United States. So the legal education has been given the importance in the United States. That is the reason why the lot of legal research work has been carried out on the methods of law teaching. Even this 5-year law program, as it was introduced in 1985 or 87 in India, was also borrowed from the law schools of United States. Anyway, here is an enumeration of the methods of law teaching. This list consists of both the conventional methods and also the modern methods of teaching law subjects. The source material, just I am giving the source. This is an article that is published already by H.G.S. Bajpai, that is Professor of National Law, University, Delhi, published in the Contemporary Law Review in the year 2018. In fact, there was cross-reference to American literature in this article. However, the list has been taken immediately from this source. I am giving this a secondary source. So the methods are enumerated like this: case method, problem method, collaborative method, interactive method, seminar method, lecture method, Socratic method, clinical method, field action projects, outcome-based learning method, and lastly, the research methods. Case method, not case study, case method. Don't take it as a case study. Case method generally, case law method, in other words, to make it more clear, to avoid any confusion between case study and case method, case law method. We know the importance of case law in our curriculum or in our teaching, especially common law subjects. Common law subjects like law of torts, a patchwork of case law. Common law itself is byproduct of judicial decisions. The law of torts is full of judicial decisions. In the public law domain, administrative law is also a byproduct of judicial decisions based upon certain constitutional principles. How these constitutional principles are applied to, I think, particular cases, that we can see in the subject of administrative law. How law is generated from case to case, we can observe in the law of torts. Therefore, case study method. What is the importance of this method? As I pointed out earlier, that the students must be taught how to read the case, how to analyze it, how to interpret it. Reading the case means the judgment. Reading the case, analyzing the case, and interpreting it. The students must be in a position to infer the outcome of the judgment. This technique we have to, I think, develop. We have to teach the students to teach, that is, instead of giving brief facts of the case in the classroom, generally, if a teacher is relying upon a textbook, in a textbook, we can get only one paragraph material on a given case. Only one paragraph material. In fact, the judgment may be in hundreds of pages. Or even if it is more than 1,000 pages, here in the textbook, we will get only one paragraph of material on a particular case. Generally, we teach that to the student. So it will not enrich the knowledge of the student. That is, student must be taught how to read the case, how to analyze it, how to interpret it. This technique is important. Today, with the advancement of technology, because of this technological revolution or information technology or information and communication technology, access is I think, easier. That is, one can have either a teacher or a law student can have an easy access to any decided case, even foreign judgments also, English cases, American cases, or cases decided by other foreign courts. We can have an immediate access to those cases. We can find the material. Sometimes the judgment, full judgment is also already placed in the public domain. Therefore, it is, I think, the present generation, I think, the present generation has that, I think, opportunity, which was not there to law students and law teachers earlier. Earlier, we were not in a position to get all the details relating to a foreign case or an English case or an American case. Only from the textbook or the judicial report we have to collect. Today, access is available to lawyer or law teacher or law student. Therefore, even original judgment is available in the public domain. That is the advantage which we have at present. This is one of the chief methods of law teaching. So, in almost all the subjects, case law is an integral part, and we are giving, in fact, the due importance to this method. Then the problem method. The problem method, that is giving a hypothetical situation, fact situation to the student and asking the students to solve the problem by the application of law, whether it is law, whether law is in the form of a statute or law is in the form of judicial precedents, etc. Asking the students to solve the problem. The problem generally framed by the teacher, it should be a hypothetical fact situation. It enables the student to learn how to apply the law to solve any definite, I think, any particular problem. We know it is in jurisprudence or interpretation of statutes, we repeatedly use the expression single sentence rule. What is this single sentence rule? Take any section of any enactment. Generally, section is drafted with only by using one sentence. Section is drafted by using only one sentence. This one sentence rule has to be applied by the court in hundreds of cases. One sentence rule, that is, this rule is so precise and concise. The intention of the legislature is expressed through that section only by using a few words and expressions. How this single sentence rule has to be interpreted, how it can be applied to, and that is variety of cases with different fact situations. That is what we have to, I think, train the student. Problem method. By giving a hypothetical fact situation, we can ask the student to solve the problem by applying the rules relevant and also the applicable judicial precedents. Then, so I think in brief, collaborative method. What is this collaborative method? Like forming of groups or the collective effort. By collective effort also, the knowledge can be acquired by the student. Therefore, the collaborative method, that a teamwork is necessary. It was practiced in the Bangalore National Law School initially, where the constitutional law teacher go along with teacher of political science. That the teacher of political science and constitutional law go together to the class. They teach. There is a political science teacher teaches the provision from his own angle, and the constitutional law teacher will look into the topic from his standpoint of view. This was what practiced in National Law School in the beginning. I don't know the present day practice, the present day teaching method. There is a collaborative method. That is a law teacher along with a social science teacher, like a teacher of economics, teacher of sociology, or a teacher of political science. So teaching the topic to the student from different dimensions. That is what the collaborative method. Then the interactive method. The interactive method is that where student can interact with the stakeholders in the legal process, like our client counseling. Just generally we introduced, and we are also we also made it as a part of our curriculum. The client counseling, the technique, that is interaction with a client, interaction with a witness, interaction with other stakeholders. That is more or less, it is experimental method. That is interaction with the people concerned, with the parties, like that. So addressing their problem, solving, that is, so this technique is also adopted in law teaching in the recent times. Then the seminar method. The seminar method is widely employed or widely used in postgraduate programs or in the research programs, where a student of postgraduate law program may be asked to prepare a paper, that is a research paper or an essay on the given topic at micro level, and he has to prepare that paper and he has to give the presentation followed by some discussion on it, like our question and answer session. So this is how the seminar method is employed, where in the undergraduate program, the student number is more. It is not practicable. Seminar method is not practicable. It depends upon the number of students admitted in the undergraduate program. In the national law schools, initially when National Law School was started at Bangalore, the only 30 or 40 students were admitted in the class. I don't know the present strength. Present strength also not more than 120. Not more than 120 in the National Law School of India, University of Bangalore. So that is 2 or 3 sections, not more than that. But whereas in our self-funding law colleges, there can be 10 sections with 60 students in a section. If the strength is, the strength of the college is in thousands, so seminar method cannot be effectively used in undergraduate law teaching. So that is why seminar method is widely employed in research programs and postgraduate programs. Then widely used method in even today, lecture method and Socratic method. Lecture method we know because we are called as lecturers, later designated by the UGC as professors. But initially, the teachers in these higher educational institutions are called as lecturers only. Why lecturers? Lecture, this is the method that has been employed by teachers in higher education. So lecture method is, that is transforming the knowledge, that is the delivery, only from one side to the other end. Probably at the end of the lecture, there can be a question and answer session, clearing session. This is the method employed. This would remain in spite of the new methods that are being either discovered or invented. The dominant method in teaching is the lecture method. Come Socratic method. What is the Socratic method? A Socratic dialogue, that is the questioning and answering it. To start with a question, even in the beginning of the lecture, we can start with the question and we can get answers from different students because the group of students heterogeneous. They answer the question from their own point of view, from their own standpoint of view. So we have to encourage the students to participate by putting the questions to the students. We get different answers from different students. There is no right and wrong answer to any question, depending upon the context. Therefore, their reasoning, their ability of critical thinking, that is, those analytical skills can be developed only by questioning the students, by putting some questions to the students and encouraging the students to give the rational answers to those questions. This is what the Socratic dialogue, lecture and the Socratic method, lecture method and Socratic method are the methods that are employed in higher educational institutions even today. Method, which we are all aware of it, the clinical courses, clinical method, where some practical exposure is given to the students and the students are exposed to this social justice environment also. That's why clinical method has been included in our curriculum in the recent years, because the pioneer of this clinical legal education was the National Law School of India, University, Bangalore, under the directorship of N.R. Madhav Menon. He was the pioneer of introducing this clinical legal education in our 5-year law program. Then the field action projects, that is to say, quantitative research or socio-legal study, and the student will get a good exposure to the social environment by participating in the project work. Let be any issue for that matter, like environmental issues or any matters of social and general importance, such as the implementation of any legislation or the awareness of people about their rights or their, I think, duties, etc. A kind of social activity can be carried on by assigning these field action projects. So that is why the role of teacher here is only to monitor, only to guide the students properly, to make them, I think, to make them or to encourage them to participate in these project activities effectively. Then outcome-based learning method. Nowadays in the curriculum, the law teachers also are asked to prepare out, that is, objectives of the course and the learning outcome of the course. When syllabus is prepared for any law course, for any subject, the teacher has to prepare already for the institution, there is a mission or vision like that. For every program, objectives are, I think, listed out. For every course, for every subject of teaching, so objectives of the course must be, I think, laid down. And also the learning outcome. What is the final, the end result, result-oriented approach? The learning outcome must also be prepared by the teacher. So in keeping in view the objectives of the course and the learning outcome, a handout has to be prepared by the teacher. That is the teaching plan. For the entire course, teaching plan has to be prepared. Even session-wise, if a teacher is planning to take 60 sessions on for that particular course, for 60 sessions, what are those sessions? What are the topics to be covered by those sessions? And what should be the learning outcome? Once objectives are laid down and learning outcome is stated, then the teaching method should be in the same direction. That is outcome-based learning method. That is what the UJC is also focusing or emphasizing on this aspect, the outcome-based learning method. And finally, the research methods. What is the use of research methods in teaching? Definitely, some kind of research has to be carried on by a law teacher for teaching also. He has to collect the relevant material. He has to identify the sources of the relevant material. He has to list out the textbooks and the journal articles and the video lessons, if any. Some kind of research has to be carried on by the law teacher for the purpose of effective teaching. So different methods can be employed even by law teacher in his preparation for teaching the class. That is why research methods, not only for the purpose of obtaining research degrees, even for the purpose of daily teaching also, research methods are useful. So this is how the author of this article has enumerated different methods of teaching which are suitable and I think appropriate in teaching of law subjects, any law subject for that matter. Next slide, please. This is all theoretical discussion again. The 5 components of effective instruction. how to teach law, any law subject for that matter. Because all these methods which we have enumerated, that is the author has enumerated in the shown in the last slide. So that is the which method is better, which method the teacher has to adopt depending upon the subject and the topic. So that is what we discuss a little later. What are the 5 components of effective instruction? Enthusiasm. That is the qualities of a good teacher, in other words. Preparation and organization. Enthusiasm. That is passion for teaching. That is the just for teaching. So that is necessary for any teacher, for any law teacher to teach law subject effectively. So enthusiasm, that is the just for teaching. Love for teaching or passion for teaching is necessary. Then the preparation and organization. Even for 1 hour lecture, there must be some preparation. And the lecture has to be organized. That is why many a times content may be good, delivery may not be good. That is, these are the problems encountered by teachers, including law teachers. That is why adequate preparation is required. And organization, it has to be articulated. So that is, mere knowledge is not enough here. Teaching is an art. It is not a cup of tea to have it by everybody. That is, a passion for teaching is required for an effective instruction. Then the preparation and organization, stimulating student thought and interest. Not only mere passing of some information. So stimulating students' thought and interest. That is a kind of some sort of interpersonal relation between teacher and student is essential for this. However, as I mentioned earlier, in our undergraduate programs, where number is more, it is highly difficult to have an interpersonal relation between teacher and student. However, there are some teachers who maintain it. There are some teachers who know the names of all students in the class. If students are called with their name, it is different. So if the student, that is why many teachers are not in a position to maintain interpersonal relation because of the number, because of the time, pressure, etc. Therefore, stimulating student thought and interest. A teacher has to identify in which area the student is good. What is his likes or dislikes? Which subject he is interested. Some teachers, some students are not interested in law subjects. Some teachers are not interested in, some students are interested in law subjects, but not interested in other subjects, in other allied subjects. So therefore, their interest must also be identified. Therefore, stimulating student thought and interest is, I think, another important aspect of effective instruction. And the clear explanation, free from confusion, free from ambiguities, free from contradictions. That is, the lesson or the topic must be explained clearly. There must be clarity. There must be clarity. Then the knowledge and the love of content. The love of, once we take an assignment, that is, once a subject is assigned to any teacher by the institution, you have to, that is, teacher has to develop some love and affection towards that subject. Without that commitment, without that love and affection towards the subject, it is not possible to give, I think, to give a lecture effectively or to instruct the student effectively. Therefore, not only knowledge, but also the love of content. These are the essential components of effective instruction. There is a lot of explanation under these 5 heads. So the source has been given, Techniques for Teaching Law, by 4 authors, in fact, only 2 authors mentioned here. It was published by Carolina Academic Press in the year 1999. Next slide, please. The time management is also an essential component of the teaching. So the best practices for effective teaching. What are the best practices for effective teaching? They can be enumerated like this. Have clarity as to what to teach and how to teach. Clarity as to what to teach and how to teach. Prepare the course objectives and outcomes, which I mentioned earlier. Whether it is mandatory, whether it is required by the institution or not, it is part of our teaching job. Prepare the course objectives and outcomes. Explain goals and methods to students. Choose teaching methods that most effectively and efficiently achieve the desired outcomes. Use multiple methods of instruction. Therefore, methods of teaching are subject specific and topic specific. That is what I think that is what I said earlier. Use multiple methods of instruction, not the single method. There is no universal method of teaching suitable to teach all subjects, all law subjects, and all topics. Integrate theory, doctrine, and practice. Employ context-based education throughout the program. Since I am familiar with teaching of public law, every day there will be some problem by the government or against the government. Since public law is dealing with the relation between government and the people, every day there is some news item, either grievance against the government or grievance of the government against the subjects. So therefore, context-based education, employ context-based education throughout the program. Even a teacher of environmental law can also contextualize the subject. A teacher of environmental law can start with this Lebanon, what is that issue at present? Then, so that is important. Contextualization of the subject is important. Then aim for research excellence. As I mentioned earlier, research methods must also be employed for effective instruction. Aim for research excellence. Not only obtaining PhD degree, many of us stop this research work after obtaining the research degree. In the universities also, once teachers are promoted as professors, the teachers are not showing any interest in the research activity. But the research excellence in teaching, it has local value. If you are a good teacher, you may be identified as a good teacher only by your students in our institution. But if you are excellent in research, your research excellence will be recognized nationally and internationally. Therefore, the research excellence it is a national currency. It will be recognized both at national and international level. But if you are good in teaching, not in research, then you will be recognized as a good teacher only at your institution. That is the fact. Teaching and research is both, that is importance to be given both for teaching as well as research. Because there are good teachers, but not researchers. There are good researchers, but not good teachers. But there are some people having both these qualities or the characteristics. So such teachers will, I think, definitely will be recognized by the legal community. Therefore, aim for research excellence. That is another best practice for effective teaching, because research in a way will improve the quality of teaching. Then the last best practice, I think it is not in the negative sense, best practice for effective teaching. Don't stop learning. So generally, earlier, we used to prepare, some teachers use it, including myself. So prepare a slip for teaching a class. After the completion of the class, we used to destroy that slip that was prepared. Next year, next same subject teaching, same topic, then we prepare a slip again for reference, slip for reference. This is the practice followed earlier. Now we are using this technology that is use PowerPoint, etc. Preparing PowerPoint document. Even PowerPoint document, that PowerPoint presentation document can also be edited and reviewed and reconsidered from time to time. Therefore, don't stop learning. Initially, a teacher might follow a single book, but there are number of books on any subject. There are number of books on any subject. As a teacher of law teaching jurisprudence, there are good number of books on the subject of jurisprudence. But I may follow half a dozen books in my teaching, not more than that. The books may be in 100 or more than 100. So that is why if you go on learning, if you go on reading the new book that has been introduced into the market or recently published or the new edition, you will learn something from it. Therefore, don't stop learning. That is also another best practice in to be adopted in the legal teaching. Next, please. Having reviewed the methods of teaching, both traditional as well as modern methods, now we come to the challenges that are being encountered in the recent months, 3 to 4 months. We are within the grips of COVID-19. It affected everyone, badly affected the economy. We are least affected relatively. Those who are in higher education. So we are, in fact, relatively, we are least affected. However, we have to sustain and survive with COVID-19. We don't know how long it takes for combating it through vaccine or other medicine. What my observation is that there were online courses and there are online courses offered by the various universities or institutions before COVID, during COVID, or even during the post-COVID era. Therefore, conducting these online classes, online instruction, online examination, online evaluation is not a new phenomena. It was there earlier. There are many courses offered online. We are using the same platform for the purpose of conducting the regular classes. Earlier, these online classes selectively used. Now we are using every day the same platform for conducting the online courses to the students of law, either undergraduate program or the postgraduate program. The tools of teaching are different, methodology being the same. What is required today for a law teacher or for any teacher? Technological exposure, technological familiarity is required to conduct these classes effectively by using this online platform. So therefore, the difficulties that are caused by this COVID-19 pandemic are to a certain extent mitigated by this technological advancement, so far as teaching is concerned. If the situation continues like this, then we have to evolve new techniques and strategies to impart this legal education effectively through this medium. That is by using the online platform. Because course material, that is e-library, e-material, we have to supply the material also online. everything online. If it is everything online, examination should also be online, assessment should also be online. If it continues to be like this in the near future. So the three important technological developments which we are the beneficiaries, the first stage of the revolutionary, I think, change in the information technology or information communication technology. The first development was computer and computerization or digitalization, use of computers. The second important stage in the development of ICT, that is information communication technology, use of internet. The third stage, smartphone. So that is with these major, I think, technological developments, which enabled us to continue with this uh, teaching and learning process. So that is only the status of this what is legal education today. For the time being, both students and teachers should enjoy virtual classes. Even Bar Council of India also gave a circular to promote all the students to the next higher class with a condition that they should complete or clear the examination as and when it is conducted. Some institutions already conducted these examinations online. Some institutions are still waiting for the future what is course of action. However, in this COVID crisis, we are missing the social environment. With the advent of this mobile phone, already human relations are replaced with only mobile relations. Anyway, added to it, the COVID-19 crisis further. So, what is further made us to live in isolation. However, the social environment is missing. All other things would remain the same. Then what will be the future of this legal education? So a brief idea of my own. The next one, the next slide, please. Quickly completing. The teachers, the young law teachers, especially, should be the young law teacher should be geared up or prepared for the future challenges. What is the challenge or challenges to be encountered in the future or in the coming future? Teaching law to the Google generation. Because already those who are born today means in 2020, 2019 or a few years back, they come with they are coming in they are brought up, they are grown up in the technological environment. If they come to the classroom for legal education, what type of teaching methods to be employed by the law teacher to teach the smartphone generation or Google generation or the next generation of law students? Therefore, how to teach these law subjects by using technology? That is indispensable. Therefore, how to teach and reach the law students? The future will there will be a discussion and a debate on it. Already it is initiated by the law schools. How to teach and reach the law students, especially the law students of new generation. So one thing is true, that only the fittest could sustain and survive. So our generation, the time is over. We are already retired, and though we are still in teaching, we are trained with these conventional methods, but the future generation of law teachers must be prepared. They must prepare to face the challenges because of the advancement of technology. Because virtual courts, virtual lawyers, how lawyers can attend the virtual courts, the teaching procedural law to the future generation who may practice in virtual courts, a new kind of, I think, a new environment, a new legal environment altogether is expected in the near future. Therefore, technological familiarity is required for any law teacher to teach law subjects effectively. That is my observation. So, with this, I wish to, I thank all the participants for the patient listening at this pleasant evening. Thank you, one and all.
Sir,
Okay.
sir, what are the strategies of coping with effective teaching and learning? Is it possible in present scenario?
Present scenario means because already two developments. One development is the context is only COVID-19. COVID-19 is to my understanding or hoping that it will be a temporary, I think what is phenomena. It will not be there forever. The other challenge that has to be faced by any law teacher is the technology, the advancement of technology. That is online courses, online programs, online court procedure. Already there is a paper in our ADR also, online dispute resolution. What is it virtual court? What is this e-court? The project that is, it is in the process of evolution. When it is in the process of evolution, how this legal practice would be in the near future, there will be a drastic change in the court procedure, in the legal practice. That is why the effective teaching and learning. So, what are the learning styles? Because if we ask the student to teach a book, prescribed book, he won't teach. Sorry, he won't read because his style of learning is different. They are learning by listening. They are learning by watching. They are learning by interaction. They are learning by some other method or some other source. Reading the book, that is reading the book, that is why there are many video lessons play that is what is posted in the YouTube also. That is video lessons already posted in the YouTube. Many institutions are also using those video lessons. Many law teachers are also sending the links of those video lessons to the students. Students are asked to go through those video lessons. If they come prepared, then there can be a Socratic dialogue or question and answer session or doubt clearing session online. That is also online. Therefore, what is the effective teaching and learning process? There is no fixed formula or a fixed method. As we discussed already, here law courses are many. Therefore, the teaching method is subject specific and topic specific. There is no single method that is suitable to teach all these law subjects. That is what the conventional that is what the idea of enumerating conventional methods. What can be the effective teaching and learning depending upon the outcome? Outcome means there must be an assessment whether the learned outcome, that is learning outcome, whether the object is achieved or not. That is, there must be a proper assessment. There must be a proper feedback from the student. Student must be assessed whether the learning outcome is good or bad. How do you know? These are all the part of this teaching learning process.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I request T. Nishit, JRF at University College of Law, Osmania University, to propose vote of thanks to Professor.
Sir, it's a privilege to propose a vote of thanks to you, sir. Sir has also been my teacher in graduation, and I can say that it's not an exaggeration to say we used to listen to sir for hours together that to jurisprudence, and without getting bored, as we all know how jurisprudence is. So, sir, thank you so much. We have seen in your lecture that the importance of jurisprudence and interpretation of statutes, which we have to imbibe and connect with other subjects, and various methods of teaching. And, sir, finally, as you mentioned, it's important for us to use technology in future, and as teachers, we'll try to use that in future as well. So, on behalf of the organizers of this workshop, I thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation and staying with us right from 6:30. Thank you so much, sir.
So thank you, one and all, especially Vinod Kumar, Irfan, and Mr. Nishit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.